This is the Epstein Class War against Iran, a war between good versus evil, the first official war of the so-called Board of Peace, an era being described as Greater Israel. Together, the United States and Israel have launched a huge wave of attacks on Iran, targeting hospitals, schools, airports, and civilian infrastructure, actions that threaten to trigger a world war. And now European countries are entering the scene. And Iran has gone full max, responding to a war they've been preparing for over 60 years. Iranian missile math is looking like $20,000 to $100,000 per drone versus $4 million for US Patriots, costing the United States much more than it is costing Iran. And Iran hasn't even accessed and used their newer missile systems. US bases and Tel Aviv have been utterly destroyed, and the devastation is clear. Now, to help us break through the fog of war, we are joined by Sharmine Narwani, who will help us make sense of all of this. Sharmine is a political analyst and journalist at The Cradle. Welcome back, Sharmine.
Thanks, Manar. It's really good to be back, even though it's a horrible time.
Yeah, it's really devastating to just watch all of these developments. The Epstein class, as we'd like to call them, have now entered a new horrific war that has been sold to the public for over 60 years, dehumanizing Ayatollah Khamenei and the people of Iran, calling Iran the largest, purveyor of terrorism in the region, when we know that it is the United States and Israel that are the imperialist terrorists in the world. So I want to talk about the latest military developments that we have seen in the last few days, with Iran targeting Tel Aviv, US bases being hit, and the Arab leader statements that are coming out saying that they'll take action against Iran if Iran goes beyond the US bases. Can you help us kind of make sense of what's been happening over the course of the last 3 days in terms of this military confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States and the Arab nations?
Yeah, I think it's important first to note what the Iranians said before the Americans and Israelis struck on Saturday. They had said for some time that this would be a different war. They had been saying that in Iran, the discourse had not been about a US-Iran war. The discourse had been about a regional war. Iran clearly made that promise that we will not allow this to just be a war between our direct adversaries who are attacking us and Iran. We will make this a regional war from the get-go. And that is something that Iran, began on day one and has startled, I think, much of the world. But if you were listening to the Iranians, you wouldn't be startled at all. The other thing the Iranians were saying in advance of this war is that the targets wouldn't just be American and Israeli directly, but they would target those countries' assets in all neighboring countries. And in the press before the war launched, the Iranians had mentioned, I think, specifically Kuwait and Jordan and the UAE. And with the UAE, they had also cited, besides military targets, meaning like US military bases, installations and radars and ammo depots and stuff, they had cited financial centers in the UAE. The UAE, of course, is positioning itself to be the biggest financial hub in the world. It is a place where plenty of dirty money has gone through. It is a place that has laundered drug money, has laundered war money, has, as we've seen in Sudan, where gold has been pilfered by Emirati-backed forces, brought through, washed through Dubai and, and so forth. So the Iranians had made clear it would be a regional war and that they would target any US and Israeli interests in all countries around it. Yet people were surprised. And in June, the 12-day war in June, the Iranians had also voted to to okay the closure of the Strait of Hormuz if necessary in wartime. And that happened straight away. There was no wait. We're used to, I mean, certainly in the last 2.5 years since the Gaza war started, or Gaza genocide rather, and then the 3 various Iranian true promise operations against Israel, we'd seen Iran act and escalate in a very nuanced way, and intermittently. Iran's escalation was usually to deter the Israeli enemy from going further in one direction or the other. This war was, from the onset, promised to be different. It has been different in every way you can imagine. The Iranians are not being careful. They're not following, they've always tried to cleave to international law to take away anyone's ability to accuse them of doing illegal things. In this case, they've gone for a whole set of target banks. I mean, yesterday we saw, US embassies and consulates burning, right? Stormed or burning throughout the region. And this is something that Iran never would have considered before, but it's because Iran views this as existential. You have the world's supposedly greatest military power and the region's supposedly greatest military power, supported by basically NATO allies in the background, right? And executing a war against a global South middle state. So for Iran, this was going to be, this is existential. They were going to go all the way. In terms of what they've targeted, I think, we need days to see these things, because I mean, every hour things are changing. Usually it would take a week or so or 2 weeks to analyze, but it seems Iran's intention initially was to take out the US and Israel's eyes and ears, particularly the Americans, because the Americans have such a proliferation of military bases throughout the region, throughout the Arab Persian Gulf nations. They started doing that immediately. They took out radar systems. They took out anti-aircraft systems. They've taken out ammo depots. They've hit military vessels. They've hit a whole, the whole, what is it? From one end to the other of the supply chain, right? And the reason for doing this makes a lot of sense. If they anticipated, so the Iranians anticipated a long war. They want a protracted war because they know it's through a protracted war that they can cause most pain for their adversaries. And it's not just military pain, but it's economic pain, right? Which is why they closed the Strait of Hormuz right from the start. They want the Western economies to suffer dramatically, Europe in particular, and they wanted the pain to be felt everywhere for long enough for the entire international community to come down on the Americans and Israelis and push for a stop to this war, right? So Iran is racing against the clock, in a sense, to take out as much of the US military presence and hardware in this region. Now, don't forget, it was, I think, just 5 days after Trump gave the order and assassinated Iranian Quds Force General Qasem Soleimani, that Iran's supreme leader at the time, Ali Khamenei, said that we will not allow US bases to remain in this region. And a good 6 years have passed since then. But the Iranians have always, the entire resistance axis have always maintained that we will wait for the right time and the right place. This obviously seems to be the right time and the right place. They're burning down everything. Just right now I was reading that there's been massive attacks on US military bases in Iraq. We saw that earlier in the last few days in Erbil, big conflagrations against US military bases and suspected Mossad operating spaces, and now elsewhere in Iraq. And in this case, the Iraqi resistance is helping. The Iraqi resistance is also doing stuff that we didn't anticipate, just the way Yemen surprised us when the Gaza genocide started. The Iraqi resistance, who everyone kind of felt had been snuffed out, are dropping videos of massive tunnel-like labyrinths that are lined up with drones and missiles in the way we've seen from the IRGC in the past, and even from Hezbollah. So they're actually, I think they're hitting Kuwait, and I think it's Kuwait and Bahrain, or Kuwait, or US targets in Kuwait as well. So this is, it's quite interesting. But the goal for the Iranians is to take out the US's eyes and ears, to hit enough military installations that they have to flee, right? To hit their supply chain, whether it's a dock, in which a port in which US military ships come and offload hardware and supplies, or actual warehousing. They've even targeted hotels where US military troops are being kept while the bases are evacuated, in advance of a potential Iranian strike. So they're hitting every part of this chain. And the clear goal then is, when that is done, there is no way to stop. Iran's been using older missiles and it's showcased a few new ones, and then it's drones. So I think the drones have taken out some extraordinary thing. Just now I was reading that 2 THAAD radars, US THAAD radars, have been confirmed destroyed. One is near Abu Dhabi and one is in Jordan at an air base there. And then that's on top of the one yesterday we saw, the THAAD radar at Al Udeid in Qatar. Okay, so the radar losses for the Americans are in the billions and billions of dollars. All right. Now, so far, I think that's 5 radar systems. What's interesting is some of these, one in particular, I think it's the one in the UAE, I'm not sure, had eyes on Russia and China and their military activity. And that's finished. That's finished. These are not replaceable in any sort of, decent time frame. And these were destroyed mainly by inexpensive Iranian drones. This is a whole kind of war that we're seeing. Iran is writing the handbook for irregular warfare for generations, potentially. And by then, Iran will have developed new tactics and strategies and techniques and weapon systems. I think, the drones that hit, that took out the big China-Russia watching radar was essentially the ones that the Americans were mocking when they were operational in the Ukrainian theater by the Russians, So it's extraordinary. Once the eyes and ears are gone, once the Iranians have depleted all US interceptor missiles, what happens then is it can basically bomb anywhere it wants. And I think that's when we're going to see, there have been relatively few strikes, you'd think, on Israel comparatively, but I think that will happen. And today we saw an interesting sign of that when both Hezbollah and Iran at the same time launched strikes at the north of Israel. That's the first time this has ever happened.
There's a reason why this war hasn't taken place for over 60 years. Since the Iranian Revolution, the United States... 47 years, excuse me. And I think I'm thinking of the years they've been sanctioned. Excuse me, getting the two mixed up. But yeah, there's a reason why this war hasn't happened for all of these years. The US went to war with other countries and not Iran because they knew that Iran has been preparing for this war for this long. As the saying goes, Iran is not Afghanistan and it's not Iraq. People don't recognize that. You can't just take out Khamenei and then expect the whole country to collapse. This is a massive nation of 90 million people. And just like the geography of Iran is so massive as well. And the infrastructure militarily and politically can't just collapse because one person is taken out or one leader of the IRCG taken out. It just doesn't work that way. And we'll get to that, but I want to talk more about just the latest developments of Hezbollah entering the war front, and Israel has already killed, I think it's maybe 500 Lebanese people. Correct me if I'm wrong. They're
I've
going.
not heard that number.
Okay, well, there's been some hundreds of casualties out of Lebanon that I've been seeing on Telegram channels. And again, there's so much fog of war. We really don't know yet what the real casualties are. But what does it mean now that Hezbollah has entered the war?
Well, I was talking to someone yesterday who was explaining to me that who had been talking with resistance people in Lebanon, and he said, basically Hezbollah's attitude is, we're going in now. This is the time. They killed Khamenei. This is, I think, the one thing that Hezbollah's current Secretary General Naim Qassem had warned, that if Iran's supreme leader, who is Hezbollah's marja, right, their religious leader that they look to, right, Shia get to choose their marja. It's like choosing your pastor, right? And based on how they deliver sermons, how they interpret scripture, and so the Shia get to do that as well. And Khamenei is officially Hezbollah's marja. So if he was killed, Naim Qassem said, then Hezbollah would enter. So they knew that the Israelis were planning to launch a war on Lebanon. It was very clear. The Lebanese, I'll tell you why it was so clear too, because the Lebanese president Joseph Aoun came out and said, no, we have what's it called, assurances that Israel will not attack Lebanon, which is, the last person who's going to know apparently is those who lead the Lebanese government. So knowing that Hezbollah did a small preemptive attack, more, I think, in retaliation for the killing of Ali Khamenei, and then just the dam broke, right? The Lebanese government went insane. People were like, you're drawing this to us. It's very clear that Israel was going to attack Lebanon. The Israelis had called up 100,000 reservists just in the day or two before this happened. And it was, they don't need ground troops for a war with Iran. It is for Lebanon, and the Israelis would see this as an opportunity. They're kind of crazy. You can't be receiving ballistic and hypersonic missiles hitting your population and then open a war front. It's insane. And a country with no strategic depth certainly cannot do that. But the Israelis are kind of nutters at this point, pushing this war on the US president and the US establishment, and getting it after 40 years, possibly the worst time. I mean, if it doesn't go well for the Americans, and from what we're hearing, there's no US military commander who told Trump that this would be an easy job. Trump kept asking, he kept saying, stop giving me these answers. I want to know. Like, I want to hear that we can do this and we can exit unscathed and victorious. And he kept raging at them because they couldn't give him those answers. But he went in anyways. And so Israel, and I mean, now, I mean, it's very likely there will be a war of some kind. But, things have already flipped on the Israelis. 2 days ago, Israel struck southern Lebanon and the southern suburb of Beirut very, very badly. But then I think since yesterday, the Lebanese resistance have taken out, I could be wrong because the news changes so much, 5 Merkava tanks. And they have situated and entrenched themselves in areas south of the Litani successfully. It's kind of insane what is building up now, because, the Israelis, many Lebanese had written off Hezbollah and its capabilities. And yet all of a sudden they're coming up as though they didn't miss a beat. They're in position, they're killing Israeli soldiers, they're pushing them out of areas. Is that sustainable? One doesn't know. But I would certainly argue that if Hezbollah and Iran are coordinating missile hits on Israel in the north, that Iran can provide the air cover, especially once the Israelis run out of interceptors, and Hezbollah can do the ground job. So it's very interesting. We'll see.
Yeah, and because of the censor that Israel has put up on all of its citizens, even on CNN, I was watching CNN, and I think her name is Erin something. She was an anchor or a reporter on CNN, and she was live reporting in Tel Aviv, and she's like, we have to cut now, we have to go off air because Iranian missiles are coming in. And she said on air, Israel has been unable to intercept them. Interceptors are not actually working. I was actually really surprised that she said that on air, on camera, because CNN has this video on their Instagram channel right now. I saw this yesterday. And she said, the Israeli government doesn't want us to report on what happens next. And then the video goes off. That's the video that CNN has on their Instagram right now. I think it's on their, across all social media. So what exactly do we know about the damage to Israel specifically? Because we do know from the 12-day war this past summer, or last summer, there was significant damage, but it really was hard to tell the extent to that damage because of this censor. So do we know anything from the people on the ground? What is your assessment?
Well, there's just a few things we've heard so far that seem to have been verified. That the Lebanese resistance's attacks have involved precision-guided missiles, drones, shorter-range rockets. The fact that they're, like I said, entrenched in areas now clearly south of the Litani River suggests that there's an operational network, there's command and control. Again, things that people had poo-pooed about Israel, who's in charge now, because the Israelis keep killing, assassinating Hezbollah military leaders even after the ceasefire was declared. We've had over 13,000 ceasefire violations. And the Lebanese government, US-backed Lebanese government, US-imposed Lebanese government only squawks when Hezbollah does something. And this is the first time. So the other day, what was it, yesterday, day before? The day before was the first time Hezbollah had violated the ceasefire. 13,000 on this side, 1 on this side. You'd think their government would support them. But yeah, it's pretty bad. So I think the fact that the command and control is being seen, and everybody knows what Hezbollah's command and control is like. It's zero communications, right? Commander gives an order, and on the ground, miles and miles away, immediately things are shutting down. This was something that would perplex the Israelis and other, observers during, for instance, the 2006 war. So command and control, frontline presence, multiple attacks, not just by weapon systems, but also by troops, right? I don't know, Radwan Special Forces, others, I don't know. What has the Lebanese government been doing? Screaming at the Lebanese army to go and arrest anyone affiliated with Hezbollah's military. There were arrests made yesterday. The numbers varied from a dozen to several dozen. And basically trying to clear the way for the Israelis to walk in, because the Israelis 2 days ago said they ordered that villagers from 53, I think, villages immediately evacuate, and that they would not be allowed back until the Israelis told them. And, that's basically never, right? And then yesterday, the Israelis added another 50 or so villages to that list. Some of them are above the Litani, and essentially think that number is around 105. So they were going to empty out the south, create a zone, an occupied zone in the south. But to do that while they're getting pummeled by the Iranians, and note that the pummeling hasn't started. Iran's strikes on Israel while they've been taking place are not that many, and hours and hours and hours. Yesterday, we counted almost 7 hours at one point between strikes, because Iran's goal, like I said, is to deplete interceptors of the enemy and their allies, and deplete and destroy and disable the enemy's eyes and ears. So I think that's what the situation on the ground on the Lebanese-Israeli border looks like right now.
And what about the Israelis that are hiding in the bunkers and the damage to Tel Aviv and military? I mean, it sounds like they're more focused on depleting the interceptors, like you said, but how are the Israeli public dealing and handling with these strikes?
Well, it looks like Iran's targeting civilian areas this time, which is what the Israelis and Americans did from day one. On Saturday, they attacked 2 schools, and 160 young schoolgirls were killed in one of them. And I think the next day was a hospital, the Gandhi Hospital in Tehran. It's a very known hospital. And then yesterday, there was a playground that was hit. These are just, it's not like that's all they did. They've hit homes. Tehran is, it's a really, really sprawling city. It takes forever to get from one side to the other, and the population is upward of 12 million. I've heard 14 million figures. So extremely congested. And to hit residential areas is insane. And then yesterday, they hit the Azadi Square. You've seen the monument, the building that goes like this. It's a famous monument. It was there.
Freedom Square, yeah.
Revolution days during the Shah's time. That was hit in what looked like apocalyptic scenes, really apocalyptic. So they're going for national symbols. They're going for, it's terror. And I expect more of this to happen. So Trump had at some point, I don't know, 2 days ago, ordered more troops, like doubling down. I don't understand. His troops are fleeing and being, holed up in hotel rooms in Persian Gulf capitals. And yet he's ordering more troops. How's he going to get hardware in? How's he going to do that if Iran will simply target a port in which that hardware arrives? It's not these things are not traceable anymore. And this is why many suspect that the Chinese are helping Iran identifying everything with the kind of detailed satellite, pictures and movements that Iran doesn't have. When they say that, I go, that's great. That's important. But after seeing what Iran is capable of these last few days, I think Iran could have its own system, of doing this. It's always known that it needs that, right? Iran has an active space program and has launched satellites into space, but I'm sure there's always attempts to sabotage or block, what they can do from that. So in that sense, it would make sense to use the satellite capabilities of bigger allies, so yeah, I think what is the U.S. going to do? I think the U.S. will do what it's always done. The Israelis will do what they've always done. Terror, okay, from sabotage that we're suspecting is happening in the Gulf states, the allies of the U.S. and Israel, okay, hitting of oil facilities, refineries, gas platforms, because the Iranians have repeatedly said since the first one was struck, we do not have energy targets in this. Our targets are, military, and so, and possibly even shared military things. So let's say Emirati U.S. installations for surveillance, et cetera, right? But not. And every day that something's been struck in the energy sector, Iran has come out and said it's not us. It may be that the tide is turning in the Gulf in terms of believing Iran over other reports, because I mean we've seen commentators certainly in the Gulf space, important commentators come out on major networks and say this is an act of sabotage. They've even accused the Israelis of doing this to basically divide the Gulf, or to get the Gulf on side fighting a war on Iran, where it's actually Israel blowing up, their economy. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting where this just keeps changing, but it is so astonishing what Iran has accomplished in 4 days. What lies ahead for Iran is the US and Israel doing everything in their power to identify Iranian missile launchers. We don't know how many Iran has, but I'm sure it's much more than the Americans think. We learned today, for instance, that the Iranians were to ensure they now have, I guess, like 10-wheeler truck, right? That moves cargo, right, from one city to another. They have launchers on those kind of vehicles that don't even look like launchers, that, the movable launchers that you see that look all military like, that these are disguised, and this way they can launch and move. And so I don't think, I mean, they know that will be the American game. They know that the Israelis have been obsessed with Iran's missile program for decades, or not for decades, but for a very, very long time. And the Israelis wanted, in these negotiations that just gotten blown up between the Iranians and Americans indirectly, they wanted the missile issue to be on the table. The Iranians said, no, we're only talking nuclear. The Americans played along as though they had succumbed to Iran's demands. But the missile program is the biggest issue. Everybody knows that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. It is as clear as can be. And in fact, I think the IAEA director just said yesterday, was it, that Iran has no nuclear weapons program. So they're going after the missiles. You gotta go. You want to hit where missiles are stored. You want to hit where missiles are being produced, and you want to hit where missiles are being launched. We don't know how much they've been able to degrade these things. Iran is a massive, massive country, a lot of mountain ranges, big desert areas. It's very, very hard to spot. If they couldn't spot all these things in Afghanistan, Iran's far more advanced than the Afghanis were and the Taliban were. Then you certainly can't spot them in Iran. So what they're going to do is try to cause pain a different way, killing maximum amount of civilians in hopes that they will turn against their government. But so far, it seems that Iranians, very proud nationalistic people, are seeing that the Americans aren't there to help them. And, the US-Israeli dream of regime change is not looking good right now.
Yeah. And we just saw reports from CNN that were published, I believe it was last night, that I think it was by Clarissa Ward, our favorite propagandist at CNN. She's, always faking things, fake it till you make it kind of girl. And she reported that the CIA is now officially arming and sending weapons to Kurdish separatists inside of Iran in hopes that they will support a popular uprising. I mean, they called it a popular uprising while they're sending these weapons. I mean, we've seen this all before, like in countries like Syria and elsewhere, but I think this kind of triggered this thought that, maybe regime change wasn't the end goal. Maybe it was always balkanization and pushing, I mean, we've reported on this, but pushing for this Kurdish separatist and to break up Iran along, sectarian lines.
The ideal. Instead of installing your guy, further weaken the state by breaking it up into little ethno-states. Ethno-states are the most dangerous things in the world. Israel is a perfect example. And a Kurdish state would be just as bad. So I think news of that is very interesting. So look at what's happening right now that we know of. So we're hearing from, US, basically US shill media that openly that Kurdish militants are being armed in the west of Iran or to enter the west of Iran. Sorry, yeah, west of Iran. And we know what happened in January when that same kind of operation was underway after the riots broke out, right? After the US, UAE, and others brought down Iran's currency, people went onto the streets complaining legitimately about economic, problems, and then the demonstrations, the protests were infiltrated very quickly by violent rioters who killed several thousand security officials and policemen, etc. And I mean, killed with knives, with guns, burned buildings, burned businesses, burned banks, burned ambulances. And at the same time, what was supposed to happen, right, was that ethnic militant groups in different parts of Iran would rise up and sort of introduce even more political violence into the space, causing chaos, etc., leading to regime change. Well, that got nipped in the bud. One of the reasons the Kurdish militant plan was nipped in the bud was because Turkey, Erdogan, told the Iranians, okay, gave them intelligence. This is a NATO ally, right? A NATO country, Turkey, gave the Iranians intelligence that this was happening, and Iran reportedly caught and killed them all. So now what's happening is the Americans, through their media shows, are saying, this is what's going to be, this is what's happening on Iran's western border. Iran's western part is also northwest, is where there's a heavy concentration of Kurds. Don't automatically assume people from other ethnicities who are Iranian citizens will veer more towards the ethnicity. They are Iranian, and Iranians are a nationalistic lot. You will always find secessionists, but they're not the majority. I mean, the president of Iran is an Azeri. Ali Khamenei has an Azeri background. I think, what did Iran's chief of, I think, naval chief was a Sunni. There's a lot of, representation in Iran. I've met ethnic Iranians who are just like, more Catholic than the Pope in Iran. So anyways, what's happening at the same time is there's reports that Iran launched a ballistic missile toward Turkey. The Turkish government said we intercepted it. Nobody knows or is claiming that it was headed to Turkey. All right. It could have been headed elsewhere, but these are the reports. Now, what that could be is they're trying to get Turkey not to play the game it played in January. Turkey so far, since Saturday, has condemned the Israeli-US attacks on Iran, offered condolences at the highest level for the assassination of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, and done a lot of other helpful things. It is also announced that the US troops will not be using the Incirlik base in Turkey, and so on and so forth. So what is this provocation? Iran sending ballistic missiles into Turkey as though it's not a NATO country? I don't know. And at the same time, they're going to launch, the US and Israelis are going to launch their Kurdish militants into Iran. Maybe they want Turkey not to warn the Iranians and give them intel this time. A lot of games are being played, from that to the sabotage of energy, energy assets throughout the Persian Gulf. I mean, right now something major happened. I think it's called the Ras Laffan gas field, I think the biggest in the world in terms of exports, in Qatar. Was not just stopped because of an attack, again, allegedly an Iranian attack, very allegedly. But today, the Qatari state announced a force majeure, which basically means, so you know how you have a contract, let's say with your home insurance company, but it excludes certain things, right? The wrath of God, I don't know, things that are beyond the control of anyone. So in the cases of large commercial legal agreements between states and massive multinational entities, what usually happens is, the lawyers on both sides try to make sure that this cannot be undermined. The legal agreement cannot be undermined by anything. But of course, there are some things that you have to put in there. And one of those things is force majeure, something beyond our abilities to stop. And war is something like that. Attacks on Qatar is something like that. Force majeure basically means that Qatar is no longer under any legal obligation to supply its gas, its LNG, liquefied natural gas, to its commercial and state buyers around the world. And Qatar is it the biggest? Is it the biggest gas? Has the biggest gas reserves in the world. Anyways, in the top three. And that takes a big chunk of gas out of global markets. Of course, a lot of Persian Gulf energy supplies are directed towards the Asian markets in particular, not as much as you'd think. I mean, definitely to Europe, and very little, I think, to the Americans. So Asia, the Japanese, now I don't know if this is true because I literally was reading it as I came on, but the Japanese have ordered the selling of billions and billions of dollars in US treasuries. And the Americans were counting on the Japanese to buy up, basically their debt, right? US treasury bills, because the Chinese were no longer buying them. These were two of the biggest buyers in the world, right? And the Russians were the Indians were no longer buying them. And if Japan has just announced this, I mean, the waves of repercussions of this stupid Israeli-American attack on Iran are truly global in every single way, in supply chains for everything, from wheat to fertilizers to what lights up businesses and homes, right, and runs the economic machinery of countries. It's truly, I mean, 4 days, Manar, 4 days.
Yeah. It's been insane. And these are the repercussions that we're seeing already. And if you look at what's happening inside of these Arab countries, I mean, local Kuwaitis are beating up American pilots. We have huge protest movements in Bahrain. The people of Iraq have risen. They're targeting the US embassy.
Nobody can stop them.
I mean, it's just like this fire has been lit by this war and by the assassination and killing and targeting of Ali Khamenei. And so it almost to me looks like the only way to stop this war is not by, the politicians in America or the politicians in Israel, but it's actually the people on the ground.
Yeah. Well, to that point, since yesterday, there have been a flurry of tweets from various embassies. I know the embassy and the US embassy in Jerusalem tweeted that basically tweeted, we're too busy. We can't help US citizens. Find your own way out. Okay. And then the State Department, I think I saw another tweet today, and people are coming out, recording themselves saying, I'm stuck here and my embassy won't answer my calls. They're directing me to lines, which directs me to other lines, which, and so America first, everybody in the US, everybody is now saying that the US did this war for Israel. So that's not America first. You're in the war. Your citizens are caught up in the war. Okay. And you're not helping them get out. The war you started, the conflagration you started, the fires you burned. So yeah, I think this is going to be a very tough time for Trump. He shouldn't have insisted so hard and ferociously that his generals give him some kind of weak, maybe we can do it, because that was squeezed out of the US top brass. It was squeezed out of them by Trump. He just didn't want to hear anything he didn't want to hear. But, forget the midterms. I mean, the guy, actually after this, both Trump and Netanyahu could be in jail for entirely different reasons.
Yeah.
Because domestically, the political will will be
Yeah,
there in a way it wasn't just 4 days ago.
for sure. And before we get into that aspect, I want to talk a little bit more about, you kind of hinted at this, but the possibility that in this fog of war and psychological warfare that Israel and maybe perhaps US intelligence as well, but Israeli intelligence could be cooking up false flags to draw in Arab and Gulf allied states into this war. I mean, we already saw the news that Saudi Arabia, I think it was Saudi Arabia, that they arrested Mossad agents that they believe were trying to do some bombings there so that they can blame that on Iran. Do you see that as a likely possibility?
It's a definite possibility. That's the way they've always operated in this region. I mean, despite all these big military toys that both countries brandish around, right? High value, multi-billion dollar toys. Their MO in this region has always been terror. And I mean, just to, and your viewers can Google this, but the first car bomb ever used in this region, okay, the people who introduced it into this region were Eastern European Jews, all right, early Zionist settlers into the Palestinian state who used it against British officers and the British military, because of course the British had the mandate over Palestine at the time. That's how the car bomb was introduced. The first use of the car bomb, in any significant way in Lebanon was used by local proxies of the CIA. And William Casey, former CIA director, talks about this. It was, and they targeted or tried to kill Fadlallah, Ayatollah Fadlallah, in that bombing. So, and I think there were something like 80 or 180 people who were killed in that operation. This is what they've always done. And the false flags are nonstop. Was it the Lavon affair in Egypt? There's just, it goes back so many decades before the discourse, that phrase false flag was even part of our lexicons. The Israelis were doing these things, Zionists were doing these things, and I think Avi Shleim, a very prominent Israeli British scholar at the University of Oxford, whose family hails from Iraqi Jews, wrote a book, and he discloses in it the false flags operations that the Zionists committed against Jewish communities in Iraq in order to make them panic and flee. And what's interesting about this case is, like, on day one, the big thing that happened was Aramco got hit. And immediately everyone said Iran's hitting Aramco. Iran came out and said, we are not hitting any energy supply plate. We're not hitting the energy sector, plain and simple. And we're conveying that to our counterparts in these countries. By the next day, the Saudis had said it was debris from an interceptor, something gone wrong. Okay. So I think they're wisening up. Even if they know, however, Manar, that it's all sabotage, they could, in the end, have another reason or another pressure point that pushes them into taking military action against Iran. So let's not just say, oh, they've realized it, and so it's going to be easy sailing from here on. There's many ways to disrupt and humiliate, right? Yeah. To humiliate publicly these leaders who feel like they have to do something. They have to show their citizens that they're still strong and leading the pack. This is a very macho region, as you know. So there's many things that could go wrong. And in West Asia, any small incident can just throw things off the trajectory they're on. So yeah, a lot, this is day by day. And it's also why Iran wants a protracted war, because as things go on, you start to see it's very, very difficult then to start to hide things. Like the Israelis can hide things for 12 days, but can they hide things for 2 months? No. Neither can the Americans. American soldiers are being killed. How many? Well, we'll find out. Give it a few weeks, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how the United States has presented this. I think it was Pete Hegseth. He did like a prayer with U.S. military soldiers that this
Yeah.
is a holy war, and it just brought me back to when George Bush said that God had called him, Jesus had called him to go to war with Iraq, and they presented it. We have to take out Saddam, and we have to kill 2 million people in Iraq. Like that was how it was presented. To justify the war in Iraq. And this is, again, how the US presents these wars as like this good versus evil. And of course, it's like backwards because they're presenting themselves as the good and everybody else as evil. But in some ways, it is true, but it's the opposite because this is the Epstein class. This is the US military, the Zionist military.
Here's what's super interesting. In my adult life, I've never seen a US war where the US has not made the case to its public before it launches war. You're already seeing majority support for wars before the US launched them. They basically, narrate them into that, what's it called? When people, into that trance, right? These are narrative trances. In this case, the war was launched where only around 30% of Americans supported an attack on Iran. And the majority were not only against it, but using a new kind of language and discourse that we've not heard, right? Which is putting Republicans, Democrats in the same bucket, right? The Epstein class, right? Yeah. It's not just the Epstein class, through people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and others who have essentially defected from the MAGA lie. Okay, I think they're still MAGA, just not with the MAGA liar. Mm-hmm. We are seeing them articulate through the voices, through Christian voices, concern for Christianity, concern for the way Christianity has been politicized and abused. How Israel has basically owns evangelical Christian movements in the US and how they're all tied into like child pornography and sex trafficking and whatnot. And at the same time that the Epstein files have come out, all these things are converging into like a narrative shock for the American people. So when you talk rightfully about good and evil, we in the region used to always say, but why can't you see that you're actually the evil and we're actually the good? Yeah. We have Americans, okay, regular Americans, Christians, mourning and apologizing and being horrified at the killing of Ali Khamenei, an 86-year-old man who sacrificed himself in such an honorable way, and accepted his fate as a martyr, but said, I'm doing this for you, the people. Like, I get my dignity from you. This was something, suddenly they saw him, not as the Americans and the Israelis have painted him for a few decades, but as, our leaders would never do something like this. They would run into their bunkers or flee, but they would never take a hit for us all, in hopes that if they killed him, meaning in his mind, if they killed him, maybe that would be sufficient for them and they would spare Iran. I mean, it's kind of beautiful. You just don't see leadership like this anymore. So in fact, in the minds of a lot of Westerners, that narrative of good and evil has already flipped. Yeah. So for Trump to go into this guns blazing, I mean, he's in a bubble. He's in a Zio bubble. What's the expression? Well, it's being able to see the forest for the trees. He just has no access to that vision. And if you tell him otherwise, he'll, yell you out of the room.
Well, and it's so interesting because you and I have been doing interviews for many years, and at one point we believed, both of us, that that Trump was opposed to a U.S. war with Iran, and that he was really against it. He's vocally been against it. We have old tweets from Trump where he said, like, Obama this, Obama that, the US this. We don't want a war with Iran. It would be catastrophic. And here he is. So it really begs the question of what has changed. And I think that, we have the local political crisis here in the US, the Epstein files, and just so many other things where when this war is over, like you said, Trump could be facing a court hearing about other things and possibly jail time. And what was I going to say about Netanyahu? But of course, Israel, has been pushing for this war, and it almost seemed like they were forcing this upon the U.S. And I'm curious to know too about, final question for you about Iraq. And the response from the Iraqi resistance. I think a lot of people don't realize that, you mentioned it earlier a bit, but the Iraqi resistance has actually entered the war front. And the people in Iraq have basically risen up to the case here against this war and are devastated by the targeting of Ali Khamenei. And so what do we know about the Iraqi resistance and the people in Iraq that have risen against this war? Because, Iraq currently holds the largest US embassy in the world. And the country itself is very divided in how, its relationship with the US looks. So it is interesting to see how Iraq has responded.
Iraq, as you may know, it has been sort of mired in this domestic effort to form a new government since their elections, which has just dragged on and on and on. And the sort of more recent development there had been that the coordination framework, which is a coalition of Shia political parties, had put forth the name Nouri al-Maliki, who was the former prime minister of Iraq, and is kind of viewed by, certainly it's the American narrative now, is that he's the Iran's man there. He has been viewed as pro-Iran, but he's done super beneficial things for the Americans in the past. Yeah. Okay, he's not any Iran's man. So I think the Americans had come in hard. Trump had come in hard and said, if you bring in Nouri al-Maliki, if you select him, we will sanction Iraq. I mean, he's going to sanction Spain too, right? And he's sanctioning everywhere. I have no words. But now that seems to have been, with the war launching on Saturday, that seems to have been put aside for right now. The sort of pro-Iran elements, and I think many Shia who also followed Ali Khamenei as their marja are incensed, and there's nothing stopping them. They're going to walk into the US embassy, they're going to cross the green line, they're going to do whatever they want, they're going to burn it to the ground, they're going to bomb the US bases. And the thing is, it feels genuinely like the US is not even shooting back. Like, they're doing nothing. In literally 4 days ago, if you shot an American, you were a terrorist, and they would literally nuke you back, right? Now, people of this region are burning everything down, everything the US has built for decades and decades in this region. Prior to that, the British, right? They're burning it all down. There will be no US military presence in this region if this continues as is, ever again. Because here's the most important aspect. Can they rebuild? Sure they can. Does Trump want to spend the money? Probably not. He might do some kind of mishmash job, but future US administrations will probably reinvest, etc. But do these Arab countries want these American military installations back? I would say today the answer would have to be no. Again, unless they're pressured, blackmailed, threatened. Mm-hmm. And I say that because the reason the US military was there was because they sold these guys a bridge, basically. They said, your regimes will be under threat forevermore unless we're here protecting you. We are guarantors of your security. not just domestically, but by other upstart regional states that may want what you have, right? They can't even defend themselves, let alone these countries. And then the worst, the most humiliating part of this is the Americans rushing to, like I said, South Korea, Japan, etc., to try to get some of their radar systems and their interceptors from these countries. And the US's Arab allies finding out that, in fact, these systems are all going to be sent to Israel. So, yeah, I don't remember what your question was initially, but
Iraqi resistance and the rise of the Iraqi people against U.S. embassy.
Right. So, what's interesting is if this continues on this trajectory, which just looks like the Americans, taking big L's everywhere, then it's very possible that it's kind of like, do you remember the onset of the Arab Spring, Manar, where people are like, there's no more fear. People have lost their fear. They're going to challenge their governments. I think there might be a sense in Iraq that, in fact, we'll select whoever that we damn well wish, right? Sanction us. It doesn't matter. There's a whole new world. There's a whole new world that will rise from the ashes of this. Of course, once we see, what the end game is.
Well, and on the outside, it always appears, and it's because of the fog of war, and it is because of the shilling of Western media. It always appears like the United States and Israel are, they're making big wins and big gains, and even with the normalization treaties
they're
that were
killing
done.
ordinary people in Iran. They're killing ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they're doing. Of course, they hit like on day one, day two. They absolutely, the first thing they're doing is looking for the rocket launchers, right? The missile launch pads. That's what but they've shot their wad. I mean, that's the thing. Like the Americans and Israelis are all shock and awe and disproportionate actions, correct?
Yeah.
So they've done that. Now they've got their drones in Iran's skies, but Iran's, like I said, geographically, I think it's 1.6 million kilometers squared. Could I have that right? It's huge. All right. They are sending drones because Iran supposedly shot down an American F-35 over Tehran today. That's what's being reported. And there's some kind of visuals. I don't know. We wait for verification at the cradle before we ever post anything like that. But I think Iran has shot down, I think, dozens of Israeli Hermes drones and US drones as well that have been operating in their skies. So that's another way of taking down. I mean, they have the capability to take down eyes over Iran because the Americans lost their big radars, right? And so now they're having to send out planes and risking them being shot down, having to send out, surveillance aircraft and drones and what have you. And those obviously Iran has the capability to shoot down. So I think American intel and Israeli intel will shrink over the coming days and weeks, and if they even last months. And Iran's missiles will keep coming.
Yeah, and it seems like Israel wants this for America. It wants the United States to be brought down in this way, because if Israel is being brought down, then it must bring America down with it. And so this chaos that it's creating through this war, like it's almost like Israel wants this, and it's okay with them, and they're just happy to see the whole world burn in flames if it can't get what it wants.
Absolutely. Israel has the story of Masada, right? Basically a suicide operation where they knew they were all going to die and they just kept going and drawing the enemy closer until they all died. So I do think Israel has felt this has been existential ever since Iran's missile program, hypersonics. The US doesn't have the hypersonic missiles that Iran has. Ever since Iran started galloping ahead in terms of its missile capabilities. And for instance, I don't know if you saw the missile. We saw 8 interceptors. I think it was 8 or 9 interceptors trying to take down one Iranian missile, which evaded them. Okay.
Wow.
We saw an Iranian missile that carried 80 different sub munitions within the missile that scatters, a cluster weapon, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
We've and Iran says we haven't gotten to our top notch stuff by any stretch. I don't know, but once Israel had a sense that Iran's missile program was way more developed than the Israeli one, and I would say Iran had become a pure adversary of the United States, the Russians, and the Chinese in missiles. Okay. Then things were existential for Israel. Israel had not been able to launch a war for 18 years on its northern neighbor in Lebanon. It had become more and more right wing. People were turning against Netanyahu for his domestic policies. This is not a country with the zeal of the early Zionists who are willing to sacrifice, arms and legs for a cause. Israel is now led by politicians, much like in the United States, if you want to call it the Epstein class or, the global elite, but people who are looking out more for their own political fortunes and financial fortunes than they were for the state's well-being. So after a while, you just get a lot of pork, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
these countries were not doing, like the US and Israel are not doing well. So at some point, this has become existential for the Israelis, and they cannot fight a war. Remember in Operation True Promise 1, where Iran, people said, oh, Iran just did a fireworks show in the sky, when it was actually an incredible intelligence gathering exercise, right? That actually scared the pants out of really top-notch US military watchers, because they're like, God, these guys are sophisticated tactically, strategically, etc. I forgot what I was going to say. I'm so sorry.
No, that's
And
okay.
then Operation True Promise 1. Iran managed to hit exactly the 3 or 4 targets that they said they would. No, they didn't name those targets, but the 3 or 4 targets that had been instrumental and or involved in the operation against the US consulate building in Damascus, right? So all the interceptors that were sent up, while they were diverted by this sort of like army of drones that Iran had sent forth, right? That took like 9 hours to arrive, right? Iran just depleted a lot of Israel's interceptor arsenal, but hit exactly what it intended to. So that scared the pants out of Israel. From then, they're just dying. They've been dying for 18 years with this itch of the humiliation they felt after the 2006 war with Hezbollah, in which, everyone basically conceded that the Israelis had lost because they hadn't won. And Israel was in such a sort of tight fist of deterrence against launching another war that, the itch was growing, the frustration, the latent impotence of the Israeli army and whatnot had just been, getting worse and worse. And after the fireworks, if you will, of Operation True Promise 1, they just couldn't. The itch became so loud for the Iranians, and they needed the Americans to do it, because that's what I was going to say. In Operation True Promise 1, you basically had the Americans, the British, the French. You had, some Gulf countries providing, the surveillance stuff that they had, courtesy of the Americans. You had Jordan intercepting drones. You had a number of countries, the world's biggest military power, the region's biggest military power, the big shots in NATO, and the very robust arsenals of some of these Gulf countries, wealthy Gulf countries, all aiding Israel. And Iran wouldn't even allow any of its Axis partners to join. They did it alone, and as with Operation True Promise 2, as with Operation True Promise 3, even now, Russia offered to do a mutual defense pact with the Iranians as part of their big strategic partnership that was launched last year or announced last year, and Iran said no. The Russians have said that that we offered up. The Iranians said no, and the Iranians have also said the same. So that is what we must conclude. They intend to do this alone. It's quite extraordinary, Manar. It's kind of like we're trained into a certain way of thinking, oh, this can't be done. It just can't be done. And then it gets done, and it gets done, and it gets done. And everybody's preconceptions, the way we've been groomed and tamed into good behavior for decades, just gone. Yes, we can strike a US embassy and a consulate and a base. Yes, we can kill Americans. Do you know what I mean? Like, the power they had over our thinking is gone.
Well, Iran has a right to defend itself. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? It's and the way they're defending themselves is the great surprise to many, and they're showing,
Smart.
and it's showing people around the world that yes, the United States has the military might and is the largest military, but resistance will still prevail. Doesn't matter how technologically or militarily advanced these nations get.
But I do want to say,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. I do want to say that things could flip. And when I say flip, it's not because I think the Americans or Israelis are going to pull out a genius thing in their, military planning, but just that they could carpet bomb entire cities in Iran. Launch everything they have at it, right? Just destroy, or even use a nuclear weapon. And I live in hope that the Russians and Chinese, at least the Russians behind the scenes, are going to the Americans and Europeans and saying, if Israel uses a nuke in this, we as a nuclear power that has, it's incumbent upon us to stop proliferation and prohibit the use of any rogue nuclear devices in wars. We will bomb Israel to smithereens. Could happen. Solves the problem.
And you think that that's an actual possibility?
The only reason I do is because the Israelis are crazy. The Zionists are zealots. Okay. We're hearing from the American right now, the people who make up Trump's administration, his cabinet, right wing, like biblical stuff from, texts of, from 2000 years ago and more. And these are the people who sit on the most devastating weapons of mass destruction in the world. And these people believe that these last battles are existential for them. And of course, Israel has, in its, sort of the story of Masada is like legendary for the Israelis.
Well, a nuclear weapon against Israel would affect Palestinians. It would affect.
No. Not that Russia would nuke Israel. I'm saying that someone would stop Israel if Israel used a nuclear weapon on Iran. And the other thing that worries me is a lot of people tossing around the notion that kind of normalizes it in the minds of, scary people.
We've reported on Israel's nuclear weapons program and the Samson option, and it is a real possibility. We've also heard rumors, and we don't know if this is fact, that Netanyahu did threaten to use nuclear weapons against Iran if Trump did not enter the war. So I think it was like former CIA agent John Kiriakou had said that Trump entered the war to protect the world from Israel. I don't know.
Americans wanted to stop Israel. They absolutely could, no matter what anyone had on them, because everyone's like, oh, Netanyahu has some videotapes and that's why Trump has to do this. The fact is, Trump could have Netanyahu killed. Car accident. The Americans wanted this war too. At some level, the Americans wanted this war. Trump may have been emboldened by, the way he's made the whole world frightened about US tariffs and US sanctions and US threats to take Greenland and Canada and the Panama Canal and, hit Nigeria and nobody's been
Maduro.
able to stop
Yeah.
him. He's, the guy is a narcissist. And so guess what? He's got emboldened. But I think the people around him want these things. And ultimately, maybe not even for the same reasons that it looks like, they're just warmongers. It could just be they want a controlled demolition of a global economic system in which they have what's coming already ready to go, so that because they know their hold over the global financial system is fraying desperately, and that the US debt is unmanageable, right? So, there are people who believe that this is a good time to sabotage their own system in order to then lay the groundwork for the new thing and then control that for another century.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot more that you and I can talk about. I love listening to you, Sharmine. I'm always learning so much. You have a treasure trove of information about what's happening in West Asia, what we call over here the Middle East. So it's been a pleasure listening to you and to get all of these updates on this horrific war that the United States and Israel have launched against Iran. And we're taking it day by day. It's like by the hour. There's just so much updates and developments in this war, and we're all praying that it ends very soon, because obviously Iran has succumbed to many losses civilian-wise. And the region looks like it's up in flames, and we hope that some sort of calm will come after the storm. But like you said, what the US and Israel did is, they're creating a new world even for themselves. It's going to become a new region even after this. So we're going to continue to watch. Yeah. And we'll be following the
and report on it. I mean, thanks to outlets like MintPress News and The Cradle and so many others now that didn't exist 10 years ago, even, people are hearing and seeking alternative information because they now know that they're being lied to. So it's really great that our narratives are sticking, and people are watching things from our ground through our lenses, videos and things like that. I mean, it's been transformational. So thank you, Manar, for the amazing, amazing work you guys do.
No, thank you, Sharmine. I couldn't agree more. I mean, 10 years ago, we were just a few handful of alternative and independent journalists and outlets. And now it's like, it is really because of people like myself and yourself, and the people that have been around for the past decade and a half, who planted the seeds for this independent media revolution. And now people across the world and in the United States, even to the far, far right, that have turned to our media outlets for that alternative information. It's been transformational in this information war. And that's why we're being targeted financially. I mean, MintPress has been targeted financially, you've been targeted financially. And so that's why it's so important for people to put their money into outlets like ours so that we can continue to report on these things. We're standing up against the US military machine, the Israeli military machine, and the stenographers within the corporate Western media that are basically the CIA and Mossad. I mean, that's how they operate. But anyways, thank you, Sharmine. We appreciate you being here, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation again.
Thanks, Leonard. You take care of yourself.
Thank you.